Man, it's early in the year and things already don't look great for E3 2020. If you remember, last year a lot of talk centered around EA not doing a press conference at E3 and Sony deciding to skip the show entirely. And now Sony has announced they are skipping the show once again in 2020, making it 2 years in a row. E3's dead. Again, I guess. In a press statement to Game Industry Biz, Sony had the following to say: after thorough evaluation, SIE, Sony Interactive Entertainment, has decided not to participate in E3 2020. We have great respect for the ESA as an organization, but we do not feel the vision of E3 2020 is the right venue for what we are focused on this year. Personally, I actually thought Sony was going to be at the show this year. I thought we were going to see something kind of similar to the PS4 lead up to launch, where we got the big reveal event early on in the year. I think it was February that the PS4 was first revealed. You focus there more on the specs, some game teases, and then at E3 they'd have a more in-depth look at the launch lineup. But obviously, no, they're going to do this one all on their own, and they certainly can. I've said for a long time that in an age where these companies can stream their own big events, announcements, and that directly to us whenever they want, it really doesn't make much sense for them all to go hard over the same week and compete for hype, headline space, all that stuff, when they could do the same announcements on their own time when they're ready. Like maybe they have something that's ready a few months before E3, or they need a couple more months to make it perfect. Why hold off or rush things just to take it to E3 and possibly get totally upstaged and outshined by somebody else? Back in the magazine days, it made sense. Again, we didn't have the streaming capabilities. The internet itself wasn't a fraction of what it is today. It actually used to be more of a trade show about selling products to retailers back in the day, like, hey, Target, make sure you order enough copies of Super Mario 64. Look how sick it's going to be. People are going to want to buy it. But also getting the journalists in there was a big part of it, who could play all this stuff, then write up their articles for the magazines that we would then read. Now, we can see everything for ourselves. Yeah, we can't play the games from home, but most of today's gaming journalists cry because they can't beat the Cuphead tutorial, so who cares what they think anyway? If you would have asked me a few years ago, I actually would have said Nintendo is probably most likely to drop out of the show entirely, as ever since they started doing the Nintendo Directs, E3 seems like less and less of a focus for them. Yes, typically the E3 Direct is still the big one, but they prefer to spread announcements out throughout the year. Which, it's actually funny because, again, they were like the first ones to stop this emphasis on E3, and I remember once they stopped doing press conferences, how many people were saying it was Nintendo who was actually dying. Like, oh, they look so weak going for this direct format instead of all the bells and whistles of a press conference. And since then, we've seen both of the other big two sort of follow suit. Sony now has the State of Play, which is pretty much a straight copy of the Directs, which, I'm not hating on. I wish everyone would just do the direct format. It's by far the best info dump in my opinion, and Xbox also has Inside Xbox. So rather than falling off like so many felt Nintendo was doing, they were actually setting the trend. Sony, I actually wouldn't be surprised if they do their own event, a State of Play type thing around E3 time in an attempt to kind of still keep their name out there while all this other stuff is going on. But yeah, I definitely think you will continue to see these companies put more emphasis on these types of shows, and while they still may attend E3, you'll see less of the big stuff there. And maybe even some of the big third-party companies will start doing their own direct type deal as well. I could see a Ubisoft or a Bethesda doing something similar. Again, maybe they only need to do a few every year, but once more, they can plan it at a time that makes the most sense for them and when they don't have to compete with other announcements. Even if emphasis is taken off of E3, the big question still remains. Is E3 dying? I actually watched my video on this subject from last year before making this one, and I'm pretty much unchanged in my views. E3 as a whole probably isn't going away anytime soon, but like I'm saying, it will continue to feel less and less important. It can still be the big show of the year, but at the same time, it doesn't need to be the be-all, end-all either. I don't know if we'll see more pullouts. I'd still say Nintendo is probably the one that makes the most sense in terms of someone to pull out next. Microsoft has their own theater like right across from the convention center. I don't think they're pulling out for a long time, if they did plan to. And I should note, Sony not coming for the second time in a row doesn't necessarily mean they still won't be back. They even said in the statement, it doesn't make sense for what they're doing this year. We know they have big stuff to announce, the PS5 and its lineup, and that's what I believe is telling and kind of proves my point. They don't feel, with 2020 being this big year, they don't feel they need E3 to promote this stuff and will be better served doing so on their own time, on their own terms. But maybe once these new consoles are out, things will sort of go back to normal. We'll just have to wait and see. And I don't want people to think I believe these types of shows in general are going away. I think it still makes sense to have them in terms of having all the game demos playable in one place, the developers being on hand to interview. That's actually a big thing too. And I also believe shows like PAX will actually continue to grow as the premier events for smaller games, indie titles, because I think a show environment actually makes more sense for indies than it does big AAA games, as indies don't have the budget for big advertising campaigns or to hold their own events, stuff like that. And there are tons of indies releasing each week, so it can be hard to stand out. This format of having people come through and try all these games out, talk about them, chat with the developers, is a huge deal for smaller titles, so I think in that arena we'll actually only see things grow over time. Yeah, all in all, I don't think the big video game convention show deal E3 is going away. It's just going to have less of a focus put on it, which I think is a good thing. Yes, I know we all like to have the big Super Bowl style event getting hammered with blockbuster announcements for a whole week, but it makes more sense to spread this stuff out and give it all time to breathe and for people to process the information, especially at a time when it seems like there are just so many huge games releasing throughout the year. I mean, at the time of this recording, the Final Fantasy VII Remake just got delayed to April 10th, meaning it's going to release less than a week before Cyberpunk 2077. That game drops on the 16th. We already have a hard time spreading out the big releases throughout the year, so I think it definitely helps to spread out the announcements for those games as well. Anyway, with that, this video's a wrap. Let me know your thoughts about Sony pulling out of E3 once again in the comments. Do you think we'll see more pullouts? And what do you think this says about the future of the E3 event as a whole? Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of Sony pulling out of E3 2020. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, and if you want to keep the conversation going, hit me up on Twitter at JohnnyZakari, and join my Discord, ChiGuy and Friends, link to both in the description below, and as always, thanks for watching.